Perspectives from Corporate Leaders on How to Scale Across Growth Markets, hosted by MIT Kuo Sharper Center for Prosperity and Entrepreneurship. I'm Andrea Cates, entrepreneur in residence and author of From Stuck to Scale. And today we'll be talking about what it really takes for corporations and entrepreneurs to thrive in the fastest growing markets in the world: Africa, Latin America, Central, South, and Southeast Asia. We kicked off the series with Florian Schottenman from Cargill, and today we'll continue to discuss our core themes: how corporates are engaging and scaling across growth markets, and how corporates can better support venture growth and prosperity. I'd like to introduce our guest today, Bunmi Akinnyemiju. Bunmi is the CEO and co-founder of Venture Garden Group and founding partner, Greenhouse Capital. He has over 25 years experience as an entrepreneur, leader, and venture capital investor in innovative technology companies across the globe. Through Greenhouse Capital, he's invested in over 65 innovative tech companies in Africa, including Flutterwave, Sabi, Pazisha, Max Africa, Helium Health. And he's also driven by a passion for nation building, serving as a key advisor as head of the Digital Economy Policy Commission at the Nigerian Economic Summit Group. Bunmi is also a member of our MIT Kuo Sharper Center's Global Business Circle. Bunmi, thank you so much for being here, and let's get started.
Thank you, Andrea. Pleasure to be here.
It's always great to see you around the globe, and I think, was it last time were we in Namibia together? Where were we together?
Yes. I think it was Namibia and then Boston. Sometimes it's a blur, but yes, it was very good to catch up. And Namibia was very transformational, actually.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about this big vision for the continent. But first, there are a lot of people who might not be familiar with your work. So tell us about Greenhouse Capital and Venture Garden Group.
Yeah, thank you, Andrea. And again, such a pleasure to be here. I think the work that the MIT Kuo Sharper Center is doing for growth markets is really, really awesome. And the timing couldn't be better. So I'm really excited to be here. My name is Bunmi, and I see myself really, people call me a venture capitalist and VC fund and things like that. And I always tell people, no, I'm not an investor. I'm a builder, because I really believe in building people. I believe in building companies, and I believe in building bridges, especially bridges that will bring capital into markets where there's just not enough capital. So that really what got me into forming Venture Garden Group 15 years ago. And Venture Garden Group is essentially what I'll call a camel builder. We're a company builder. We're a venture studio, right? And over the years, we've built about 15 companies. So we essentially have this under one umbrella of an investment holding company that owns all this B2B SaaS software company. One key thing about all these companies we've built is that we build them for sustainability and profitability, right? That's why we are essentially a camel builder. Fast forward about 5-6 years after we started Venture Garden Group, myself and my other two co-founders, Kumi and Demola, we just said there's a problem around the capital stack, especially on the continent, of Africa. And we said, let's start a VC fund. And so that's how Greenhouse Capital was started. And Greenhouse Capital is essentially a VC fund, started off as a VC fund. So we've done about, 2 funds. We've invested in 65 companies, but we're now evolving because we see what's broken in the VC world. We're now evolving into essentially a capital formation studio, helping people who want to stand up funds to help them create a fund, especially corporates, which is what we're talking about today.
Well, that's a great transition, because there's a perspective on this in this series on corporates. And of course, since I'm always thinking about scale, and everyone doesn't have to be stuck, but certainly the notion of scaling is important to everyone in growth markets. So I want to go back, first of all, to define a little bit for people that aren't familiar with articles you've written, work you've done, the difference between a unicorn and a camel, because there's a little bit of difference, and I know that there's room in the world for all of these, but I would love it if you could share with everyone how you view these camels when you talk about, long-term profitability and sustainability in these growth markets. What's the difference?
Yeah, no, Andre, this is what I love talking about the most, right? And actually, I'm very inspired by, Florian and the Cargill team, right? And I know he was on this podcast the last time. So it's really an honor to be your second guest. Really, really exciting. Yay. But anyway, Cargill is a private company. They've been around for 160 years, and they're family owned. They're not publicly traded. They don't do articles all around the place. You don't know about them. Yet their revenues is over $150 billion, and they're massive. They're huge, and they've been around for a long time. Now, okay, on one hand, they're kind of a camel because they've built an enduring organization, and I think that's like a good, example. Without all the fluff, without all the branding, yet they're a very important pillar of the food system globally. In the context of Africa and growth markets, I see camel and unicorns as two different things, and I am a huge, massive believer in camels. And why is that? Because essentially you have these markets where the capital stack from family and friends, angels, Series A, Series B, Series E, Series G, pre-IPO, IPO, the plumbing around that journey is not fully built out unless you're in Silicon Valley, New York, Boston. Because it's not built out fully yet, essentially you cannot go around chasing unicorns, right? Instead, by building sustainable businesses that's solving a real problem, not based on hype, and you're really working to make sure that these companies can weather the storm. Because in emerging markets, you're going to have the cycles, election cycles, devaluation cycles, and just random events. A camel can withstand a lot of those because it's built for sustainability, profitability. And I argue that the probability of success for a camel is closer to 70, 80%. This is what we do within our studio, Venture Garden Group. Whereas the probability of a unicorn may be 0.01%, right? Almost like you're gambling at that point, right? And of course, there's some caveats. There's some types of work that you do, like deep tech, et cetera, where you need a lot of capital, and so you have to grow and scale the capital stack. But I think that 80, 90% of the time, going for building a camel is the smart idea. And I think Cargill has shown us that it is actually possible to build, an incredible company that lasts over 100 years with that philosophy.
So I know when we were in Latin America last year, or this year, earlier this year, and there was a discussion in Brazil about companies that became unicorns, and then the teams had the prowess and the expertise to be able to give birth to other technology companies or other companies. The muscle of being able to build a successful company, probably for a camel and a unicorn, there's a level of business expertise that probably good for the region no matter what. So it's not bad. I would hope that we're thinking it's not bad to have a unicorn, but to bet on that as the only model in some of these markets is probably not the only option. And especially when you're talking about looking at the way that capital flows and the way that, the idea of even having an exit with some of the markets is pretty difficult.
I agree with you. So it's not to say unicorn nothing. I mean, we invested in one of the early unicorns, one of the largest unicorns on the continent, Flutterwave. But I feel like we were lucky, right? So do I want to build the primary fund thesis around luck? No. That's why I think, yes, if we're lucky enough to run into a unicorn, incredible, fantastic, right? Yeah, so I agree with you 100%.
Well, I love that. That's actually the quote of the day so far. Do you want to build the primary investment thesis around luck? And this is really a great transition into this notion of what scale can look like when it's not in a camel-based market, perhaps, What can it look like for the right combination? So a lot of us are familiar with the unicorn path, the VC path. But what are some alternatives as far as the unicorn, excuse me, the camel? What are some ways
Yeah.
that corporates can play really well? What are some new mindset shifts that need to happen with the corporate executives that are looking to expand in these growth markets? And I would also, wonder, what are some great human characteristics that corporate leaders need to really bring forward to be trusted partners and accelerate, use their scale for good?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think you're that's such a good question because you'll hear me talk a lot about ecosystems, ecosystems, ecosystems. Interestingly, we're on a call today that's all hosted, on the platform of MIT, right? And MIT, essentially invented this idea of ecosystems, right? The 5 parts to an ecosystem, which I'll talk about a lot today. You have the corporate, right? You have the educational system, you have government, you have the risk, capital as well, and then you have the innovators and the entrepreneurs and just the local entrepreneurs, which I think ecosystems should be designed around them, because when you unlock entrepreneurship in any community, right? You remember our little triangle that we always show, right? The triangle around the entrepreneurs in any community and how you create prosperity, right? So the corporates are a very important pillar around this, and I think the idea around building camels at scale in a way that transforms, countries and regions is something that can be very, very repeatable, especially when the corporates are playing their role, right? And I think there are 3 roles that a corporate can play that will be extremely catalytical and transformational. The first one is distribution, right? The corporates have distribution, whether that's a bank, whether that's a telco, whether that's an insurance company, whatever it is, the corporate has distribution. Second is trust. The corporate also has trust by virtue of their size, by virtue of their balance sheet, that by virtue of many other things, right? That a small entrepreneur, a small, founder, a small startup does not have. And finally, the corporate has capital, right? So I think in the journey of creating camels, right? Yes, you can talk about creating, Africa has what, 9 unicorns since VC really started on the continent, right? So VC really started on the continent, 2016. There was about $400 million in total across 54 countries, right? $400 million, right? So from $400 million, it grew on scale, and in about 4 years, by 2020, we're talking more, more like, $4 billion, right? And essentially, that was a big, massive jump of like 10x growth. That is maturity. Now, I think that in that journey of the VC ecosystem growing, it's created a lot of startups that could be incredible camels. Unfortunately, everybody wanted to copy Silicon Valley, which means everybody was like growing at all costs, burn through all the money, burn it so fast, and so on and so forth. So when the VC winter then showed up in 2022, 2021, 2022, 2023, even 2024, that VC winter is how you start to see the vulnerability of chasing a unicorn type of model. Now, I see an alternative world where the corporates are saying, hey, small startup, come and use my trust, come and use my distribution, right? And even if it's a little capital or not, it's okay. Distribution is why they go to raise money anyway. So I think there's a symbiotic relationship that's possible. And I see a world where the kind of like unlock for regional prosperity through these smaller companies that are built camel style, I think is really incredible. And I think it's really all about the MIT ecosystem approach, but with the corporate in the middle of it, now bringing all the other players together. I think if we do that, we create incredible growth.
Okay, so I'm going to say something perhaps a bit provocative, which is there has been a model where when the corporates place themselves in the middle of these ecosystems, and as you know, I've been at this for probably 15 years as well, maybe 20, sometimes in an older model, there was a sense that it was what I call an ego system, not an ecosystem, that the corporates would place themselves in the middle, but it was kind of like a glorified supply chain where they were in charge of a lot of vendors and distributors, and this notion of the trust in the market, which, by the way, the local companies would have a lot of, especially if it was a smaller, medium-sized business that has been local for a long time, trying to scale to other regions or other geographies or other products. The mindset, I'll challenge you to maybe disagree with me, but the mindset in the past has not always been one of shared prosperity. It's been ecosystem, and it's been, corporates kind of have all the power. Corporates, may or may not have always used this symbiotic unlock. It was more like a one-sided acquisition mindset or collaboration, but from the larger to the smaller. One of the things that we're seeing a lot now, and once again, just came back from Central Asia, where this is happening a lot, and throughout Africa, where we just had the really incredible startup demo day with a lot of startups in Africa, and of course in Latin America that I was talking about. There's so many companies that already have a stronghold in a local market, and so you could also think of the unlock being, here we are with a local market. Here you are, global corp, trying to come into a new market and helping them leverage the trust that the smaller company has. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, Andrea, you make a lot of good points, but let me stand on the side of the corporates for a second here, right? I think in fairness, right? Like you're Starbucks, you're Netflix, you're Disney, whatever, and you want to grow into, Botswana or Nigeria or Uganda or Kenya, right? The way you're thinking as a corporate executive is like boom, 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 boom. Number one, where's my PR kit? Number two, send a team in, set up from corporate, set up an office. Number three, what's our formula? What's our playbook? What's the thing? What's our supply chain? And those type of things. Number four, we begin to sell, and we work out all the kinks and the logistics and make sure that we can collect money and make sure that the regulatory piece is there and there's a local bank account and those type of things. So I think in fairness to these global multinationals, right? Your home country is the perspective that you have by default. Unfortunately, global expansion is a lot more complicated than that, which then means that everybody's been burned. Is the market big enough? Am I sending all kinds of expensive people in there, the regulatory interface and all these different things, right? So I think from that standpoint, you could see why they're thinking, I come in, I get the value, I go out, in and out, and not enough investment or being vested in the local community. But on the other hand, when I think about the effect of that, it means that you need budget for regulatory affairs to kind of manage government. You need a budget for crisis management. When the local community says, hey, you're destroying our water, you're destroying our air, you're polluting, whatever, you're extracting this and you're not so you have to play defense a lot. Now, I think the MIT ecosystem approach moves from what some might consider extractive, what some might consider just these other mechanism of engaging, to one where you go and you map out your 5 stakeholders. You think about the universities and say, hey, how can they be a talent pipeline for your local company, right? You think about the local SME and you map out your supply chain and say, hey, here are all the SME, right, entrepreneurs. Think like Uber, right? Like Uber has all these drivers who are driving, right, who are part of the ecosystem. I'm just using that as an example. The day government wants to shut down Uber in a particular location, the people that are going to be on the streets fighting are going to be these micro SMEs, gig workers who want to prevent it. So in the same analogy, whether you're in agriculture, Florian had a very good example of that last time, or you're in, you're a supermarket, by deliberately taking an ecosystem approach and creating a trust ecosystem that is fair and win-win, not winner take all, to your point, right? You actually create this interlock, right? You create this synergy, you create this shared prosperity, and more importantly, you create this flywheel where I argue that the budget you have in legal and all this crisis management and those types of things is way more than what you would spend when all the universities around you are fighting that this company must stay, right? Because they know that they're a feeder into you, right? You have Chinese companies that come and build railroads, right? Railroads. They build a train system. How about all the spare parts, right? The consumables being actually manufactured in the nearest TVET colleges, right? And things like that. So this integrated system, I believe, leads to sustainability. It's a new way for corporates to really, really add value to their local ecosystems. And I think it's a way to turbocharge entrepreneurship, right, at that SME level in growth markets. And I believe that considering everything going on in the world today in the geopolitics, I think it is the companies that adopt this style, I call it ecosystem capitalism, if I'm allowed to call it a thing, where shared prosperity is built on this idea of, distribution, trust, and capital, right? With corporates at the center of it, could be really, really transformational.
Well, I really love this, and I'm going to turn to the audience. First of all, we're so glad you've joined. There's lots of people already listening live, and hopefully there'll be people listening to this asynchronously, because we're now going to take questions from the audience. We've got a few that have already come in, and I'll ask a couple of these, and then after that, we'll go into a couple of actual case studies of Bhumi's, your experiences in exactly the themes that we've been talking about. But the first question is really interesting from the audience, which is, what strategies have helped you, or the notion of navigating in these emerging markets? You talked about the challenges, you talked about some volatility, what happens when you have to be pretty resilient, when as you said, elections can change things. This is in all markets, of course, but elections change things, access to capital changes, currency issues. There are all kinds of infrastructure interoperability things that need to be addressed. So what's a strategy that really works that you think is sort of secret sauce for really navigating these emerging markets, especially if you're a corporate?
Yeah, I think if you're a corporate, the things that really, really help in navigating, I think it's really going to come down to, I'm going to say this all over again, ecosystem approach, right? When everybody is vested in your success, right? That collective success, when the idea of the rising tide lifting all the boats, right? Then I think that helps a lot, right? So I think that's one. I think two is just the idea of relationships, right? Relationships, local relationships. I see a lot of, and this is why as a VC, when we were running our second fund, where we had a lot of investment in Kenya and a lot of investments in Dubai, I promised myself that I will not stay in a hotel. While I'm expanding into these places, I'm not going to stay in a hotel, because hotels suggest that I'm in and out. I'm briefcase, just in and out. I'm not vested in the local community, right? So I will actually get an apartment. I will actually live there for weeks. I will actually host people there, and so on and so forth. So I think the power of relationships and the power of making people know that you're highly vested in the local ecosystem beyond just making a buck, right? I think that is really, really helpful. And then finally, I think even as a big corporate, I will argue that as a big corporate, you should structure your OPCO in these countries as a camel, right? Structure them as a camel. And what does a camel do? A camel can go a long time without water, right? A camel can face a lot of brutal, times, ups and downs, right? And I think those are my two recommendations, really.
Okay, well, you knew that the next question before the spotlight stories were going to be around AI and deep tech, because a lot of what we've talked about, it feels as if, and I know this is the way we've been talking, it's a little bit as if, not defensive, but we're reacting. It's reactive to what's going on. The most impressive and inspiring work that, as you know, we do at the center at MIT is proactive. The ways that we look at, big challenges, take them on, whether it's through growth opportunities, whether it's through looking at deep tech as a way to look at a larger issue, perhaps a regional issue. There is also a lot of work we're doing around building regional economic advantage, where a certain region collaborates, whether it's government and university and corporate and entrepreneurs and innovators working together to establish the regulatory infrastructure you were talking about, to really figure out the best way to join forces, band together, and look much more proactively, much more in a positive vein. So the question that we have is around AI and deep tech, and either of those probably, like what does it look like for innovators, corporate visionaries, as well as local markets and perhaps universities and government to work together to proactively set the stage for these camels and perhaps a couple unicorns to really do well, for corporations to thrive in these growth markets, for innovation to thrive in these growth markets. And I loved what you said about turbocharging it, to really turbocharge innovation. So talk about AI and deep tech and the sort of optimism that you see when we proactively address some of these wicked problems.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think AI and deep tech, you cannot have a podcast without talking about AI, right? Otherwise, the podcast is not complete. But really, I think deep tech is also something that is very important, especially in the context of some of these growth markets, right? Because if you think about these growth markets, frontier markets, Africa as an example, the biggest problem in these markets is that they're not producing enough, right? They're consuming more than they're producing. But why are they not producing? Why are they not producing? After all, they have the arable land, they have the minerals, they have the oil, and those types of things. Well, they're not producing because ultimately the ability to extract those things and process locally is not there, right? So they essentially have to export the raw materials and then import the finished, materials. Whether it's something as simple as mango into mango juice, you have a lot of losses along the value chain, right? Because you don't have the cold storage and the logistics and those types of things and everything. So that value chain that is broken, I think presents the biggest opportunity for me. I am optimistic around deep tech, especially with a little bit of AI and a little bit of fintech in there. I'm extremely optimistic because with deep tech, I believe in this idea of modularized processing. The industrialization of Africa, I think, is coming, and it's going to be modular, it's going to be miniaturized, right? Because when you think about something as simple as refining petrol, you think about $100 million investment in this like mega factory and this type of thing. Now, instead of $100 million factory, can you imagine a $1 million factory in a small little village where the extraction happens, the processing happens, and the fuel that the little village needs is refined? Now, can you imagine how disruptive that is, right? And I think that's really what deep tech allows us to do. Everything from like little 3D printing and little kind of machines that are miniaturized and those types of things. I feel that the industrialization of Africa can happen. Even AI, we're talking about large language models, right? How about the small language models? How about the edge computing? How about the mini data center that's in the village, that's powered by the river, right? and a little micro turbine, right, into a little bit of a container data center with the cooling, and everything is just miniaturized, right? So I think the opportunity in the world, and most people are not thinking about it that way. They're thinking about the big stuff. But I think our ability to create the modular stuff is going to really, really change the game. And I think it's in the intersection of deep tech and AI, plus a little bit of fintech. And why do I add fintech? Of course, I'm biased. I run a fintech fund and I build fintech companies with vertical SaaS. But beyond that, think about most of the successes in Africa in tech. Most of the successes happens because you are able to embed lending into the value chain. You embed payments in the value chain. Even go to the West, think about GM, Ford, General Electric, right? You see them as a vehicle company, right? An electronics company, but they're a financing company too, because they actually bundle financing in. What is that going to look like in a growth market? So I think it's AI, deep tech, plus embedded fintech is the magic.
So I love all of this. This is a conversation there are two or three themes I really want to explore before your spotlight story. I mean, one of them is we've talked about leapfrogging, and I was, in business long enough to remember when telecom, everything was about infrastructure and last mile and T1 lines and all these things. And then suddenly they thought, well, wait a minute, we can get last mile through telecom without any of these infrastructure challenges we've been facing. And all of the leapfrogging that was possible in the mobile markets was amazing. Then, of course, anytime there's a leapfrog opportunity, it's because of this mindset shift. It's the mindset shift that we don't have to have the meeting about how to dig another line for another cable. Instead, we need to have a meeting about how to create Wi-Fi for all in the city. And it's a mindset shift that I have viewed, at least in my experience, as really the first spark of possibility. When you change your mindset, and I remember working with a wind company that had one customer, and they knew how to fix one type of windmill, and they were sort of a service company. And because they shifted their mindset, they were able to say, well, wait a minute, wind farms are coming. Why don't we start to run wind farms, have digital twins, have the ability to apply all of these new technologies? They were small and nimble and actually outpaced some of the large clients that they had. And that mindset started to open up all of these possibilities. And by the way, now they are very strongly partnered with, maybe even formally partnered with some of the large companies. So, I mean, I feel like the leapfrogging thing is one that we've talked about, where mindset starts and suddenly this new technology is there. But the people who are going to have the creativity to make it all happen, it's just as likely for it to be a small entrepreneur or a local as a corporate, and they both win. And I think the second theme that you talked about that's super interesting is what you said a few minutes ago about mapping. When you step back and zoom out on any given market, whether it's a region, whether it's an industry, and you zoom out and say, where are the missing pieces? And strategically, you zoom out and map it and say, okay, we can proactively get the technologies, the deep tech, the growth stage, the early stage, to all interlock as parts, so that there's a smooth operating opportunity within a whole region, within a whole continent, within a global opportunity. And to me, those are really interesting ideas.
No, you're really spot on several of those things, and I think I want to, any corporate listening today, I would say that mindset shift is the first place to start, right? Getting the board together, getting the management team together and saying, hey, it doesn't have to be like winner takes all. It's not a zero-sum game, right? Corporates have those three things I said, and startups, on the other hand, they have speed, they have agility, they have hunger, and in reality, they add a lot more to the GDP of communities and jobs just because of the scale of the number of entrepreneurs that you could really, really activate. Now, if you bring the trust and the distribution and the capital from the corporate and you combine that with the inventiveness and the speed and the agility, right? Because the startup is really, really motivated to take that risk and try things out. The corporate mindset is motivated by protecting their market share, protecting their jobs, which is fine, but the magic unlocks when you bring the two together, which I think is the point that you're making. So if everybody
I love
can
it.
take a step back and bring it all together, then I think we begin to unlock a lot of value.
Okay, so quick question, and then I want to hear your spotlight story. So what should startups be prepared in terms of general infrastructure and offerings to attract corporates?
It's tough for startups to attract corporates, let's be honest, right? Because it's just like you have the David and Goliath. Well, maybe that's not a good example because we're not supposed to be killing each other here, right? But the idea is that you have the incumbent that is really powerful and dominant, right? I think it's very difficult for the little guy to come and to just say, let me attract the corporate, right? But at the same time, I think that ultimately these are still humans. Humans partner with humans, right? And at the end of the day, I think by essentially connecting with the right person in the corporate world, building a relationship, everything is all about relationship, and being able to articulate win-win. You do what you do best. I always, my favorite is banks working with startups, right? Like I help to bring that together all the time. Bank, do what you do because the startup can never be that. Startup, do what you do and stay in your lane, and let's share. Let's share, right? And there's no need for one side to say, hey, I must take 90% because I'm in a dominant position. What you want to create is a flywheel and an ecosystem that ultimately grows the pie, right? I remember I was doing a board retreat with one of the banks, and I talked to them about this idea of the invisible bank. I was like, bank, you could be the invisible bank. How are you the invisible bank? Because you're powering all the startups and all the SMEs, but you're invisible. Nobody sees your name, right? So even if the startup little messes up, right, you're not the one messing up, right? So you're abstracted. And I think that resonated. So I think the work to do is build relationships, demonstrate win-win, and create the swim lanes for everybody to kind of play their own role in the area where they're best.
Well, I like that a lot. And so I'd like to have you tell us a spotlight story. So one of the things that we always remember is something that you've experienced that is a great example of the themes that we've been talking about, the perspectives of corporate leaders in scaling across growth markets, and how you really bring better support for venture growth and prosperity for everyone. So what spotlight story would you like to tell us that is something from your experience?
Oh, there's so many. I don't know which one to pick.
I would
And
love
I feel like
I
there's
would love a
also
fintech one actually, because I feel
a
like
fintech one.
when
Okay.
when we spoke with Florian, it was agriculture. I know you have agriculture in your background. I think in terms of the another industry that would be interesting for our audience is fintech, which is something that in most markets a lot of innovation is happening, especially from small companies. The nimbleness has been happening on the edge for a lot of companies, and as you said, the incumbents were struggling for a while in fintech to keep up, to figure out, is blockchain a thing? What are the interoperability issues? What are cross-border issues with fintech? So I would love a fintech example that highlights some of this idea of the opportunity for corporates to really scale and help others scale.
Okay. Yeah, no, I have a few. I'm just trying to think the best. Now, like for one, I think the best case study of global corporates partnering with a local startup that kind of shows the model is Stripe in the US, big, massive, one of the biggest fintechs in the world, coming into Nigeria, investing in a small little company called Paystack. We didn't invest in Paystack, we invested in Flutterwave, but they were kind of sister companies at the time. And then eventually saying, hey, I want a taste of Africa. After making that small little tiny investment, which is like a rounding error, they then said, let's buy this company. And they bought it for almost $200 million, right? So again, I wasn't part of that, but let me tell you a story that I was part of that I feel is sort of this ecosystem approach, right? In fintech, you talked about telcos already, right? And leapfrogging. Africa has leapfrogged, right? Today, Africa has the largest portion of mobile money transactions in the world, right? So we kind of moved from landline, we moved to mobile, in terms of making calls, and we moved from mobile to bank accounts, essentially wallets and banking. So today, I argue that the biggest banks on the continent is already the telcos, MTN, Airtel, Safaricom, because the number of subscribers, number of bank accounts they control is more than the banks. And that is scary, and it's going to get worse. Now, how about a different world where everybody's working together? How about a different world where there's true partnership? Because telco has reach, they have distribution, banks have the balance sheet, they have trust. Startups have inventiveness and innovation and speed and agility. And I think one of the big case studies here is a company called Kunda that we had the opportunity and the privilege to invest in. Really, really proud of what the team is doing, and they're just killing it. But I feel like there's this little startup that came and said, hey, we want to do lending, right? We want to loan money to different people and do this at scale. Now imagine a case where a small startup, right, needs to go and onboard, do marketing, find all these individuals, do credit scoring, go find the data. How do you score these people? We don't have FICO, we don't have Experian and those types of things. And then, finally say, hey, you want a loan? Well, you have to open an account. Okay, so infrastructure is too much. But what Kunda did was very, very brilliant. They just said, hey, let me allow everybody to stay in their lane. Let me be the one innovating around the product, right? Let me get the telco who has all these wallets and the data, behavioral data that I can use to credit score, right? Let me do the credit scoring engine. Let me give them a share of the money because they're bringing the customers, right? So I don't have to do any marketing, and they're bringing the data. Now let me go to the bank and say, bank, you have trust, you have balance sheet, you bring that. And it became a beautifully orchestrated machine. And they now literally drop this formula in each country, right? In each country, and distributing loans to small businesses, SMEs and retail overdraft product. So the traditional overdraft that your bank offers you today, they basically put it on steroids in a way that can reach millions and millions of people every single day through the power of ecosystems. Now, next time I meet them, the next thing I'm going to ask is, how do you bring the universities into it? How do you bring, government into it? And the government is already there because of the, lending regulations and things like that. But I think a true ecosystem creates scale that can be actually very, very exciting.
That's a great example. I remember I was doing, as you know, I did a paper last year on the Arab Gulf states banking. And the first thing that you do is you talk to the incumbent banks, and you're talking about what's coming next and how do you expand the market, et cetera. And they were all benchmarking against each other. And when you went to the customers and said, what do you think's coming next? They said, well, I do all my payments on STC Pay. A mobile company had much more of their money in transactions. The banks were a bit slow at the time. And so here they were benchmarking against each other, incumbent to incumbent, when actually the big change was happening on the fringes, in the margins, with basically other industries, a mobile company and some of the like Careem and some other providers that had a lot more of the share of wallet. And that was when the incumbents had this idea that maybe there's some things we should learn from the margins and from other industries. And I also like the example because fintech is something, at some point everybody has to get paid. If there's a transaction, even if it's a sort of a social impact. There's an exchange of value and capital. So to me, it's universal. And I also, what I like about the story is also this notion that it's land and expand, or, rinse and repeat, scaling, the ability to build the scale into the structure right from the beginning and be able to replicate that, to me, is huge. That's a really great example. So I have some quick questions, and then we're going to do a lightning round. And we're also would love more questions from the audience. The questions are coming in fast. They're it's a really active audience, so I'll keep integrating some of those in the next few minutes. So there are some what I call boomy themes where I read about it, I talk with you about it, we work together on it, and of course through your work at MIT, you're engaged in bringing corporate conversations around these things. So I'm going to we've talked about camels versus unicorns, liquidity, distribution, aid to trade, venture studios, regional economic advantage, and as we call it, the new calculus for prosperity in global markets. You can pick any of those, and from looking at what we can think about for corporates, what role they can play. As I said, I'm already going to try to institute something with this mapping project. It's a big idea to be able to have a formal way of mapping the holes in markets and figure out how to accelerate growth that way. What's one of your quick ideas with regards to any of those boomy themes?
I would take aid to trade, because I don't think I've touched on
Jeopardy,
that
where
today.
we take like a topic for like $500.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we'll do aid to
Aid to
trade for
trade.
500.
Yes. So aid to trade for 500. I mean, I think aid to trade for me is really all about, there's no doubt, right? With USAID going away, and with directionally a lot of governments moving away from essentially like aid, right, into other countries. I think it's an interesting time. Obviously, corporates have their CSR and things like that. I think it's an interesting time to really rethink the model, and rethink the model in a way where you think about trade, because you can do good, right? You can do good without just like giving money away, right? You can do it in a way that can be empowering. It's literally teach me how to fish, don't give me a fish, right? And I think that is really something that is transformational. One of the big examples I've seen around this is, right, you can come and give all the SMEs a little bit of like, money and say, here's my CSR. Or you can look at all these SMEs in Africa today. Many SMEs, they borrow at 40 or 50% APR, interest rate annually, some 100% annually. Now, if you just rethink as a big corporate and you see yourself at the top of the value chain, you're borrowing at 5% annually, maybe 10% annually. How do you take your credit rating and essentially use that to support the SMEs downstream, right? So you've not given them money, but you've given them a credit rating, because after all, you are the one at the top of the chain, and all we need is data and transparency across the board. So I think that's just one example of a way to move from giving money away in terms of aid to trade, which is literally, I'm teaching you how to fish. And sometimes, or most times, it ends up being a lot more sustaining. And I think that's where the world is going anyway. Did I get the 500?
Yeah, you got the full 500. That was, especially since it's about your opinion, you're definitely going to get the full 500. You can't be wrong when it comes to opinions. So they should probably have a Jeopardy game for people's opinions. That would be a great twist on it. Okay, so these are the lightning round. This is literally, so in social media we can have a question and an answer, and you can also say pass. Are you ready?
Sure.
Okay. So which trends, whether it's popular or business related, which trends are you tracking right now? Short answer.
Real world assets tokenization.
Oh, that could be a whole webinar right from there. Okay. So who are you following in terms of blogs or podcasts or thought leadership? Who are you following these days? Whose opinion
Um,
or
Good
entertainment, I guess?
question. Yeah, I don't do enough of that part. So we need to work on entertainment a little bit. I think I'm following Ray Dalio. Ray Dalio talks a lot about this idea that nothing is new. Everything is a cycle that has happened before. So by studying the past, you can predict the future. So I really love that.
Great. What's one question you wish more people asked when when the topic comes up of how to scale in a growth market? One question.
I wish they asked, how might we do this better?
Mm,
How might we do this better? And ask that 5 times.
yeah, that's a great way. Actually, I'm thinking of as an upcoming strategy retreat we're doing on campus. I think that might be a great way to have a conversation. Okay, now you know that we at MIT Kuo Sharper Center do on campus and in the field programs, and I got one idea from you today, which is this mapping project. I think it's really an interesting project. I wonder if you have another creative idea about something we might tackle, maybe even together with the notion of building the corporate muscle in growth markets. Hopefully you're with me on the mapping one. Yes?
Done.
Okay.
I'm with you.
Okay, deal.
I really like the idea of what the center does around convening, which is almost like an ecosystem event that brings different parties together. And you know, I'm a big fan of what are the wicked problems, right, of Africa? What are the wicked problems of some of these growth markets, right? I think that idea of taking a problem, bringing multidisciplinary people into one room over a few days and coming out with a solution, but not just a solution, right? But also a pilot, people committing to pilots. I think that is so brilliant. My suggestion would be, how might we take that to the next level where we essentially do these things. We used to do these things like 15 years ago, 20 years ago, called the startup weekend, which is basically you start on Friday, on Sunday, you should have a working prototype, right? You should have a working prototype. I think it would be really cool to do one of those. And you bring the builders in the room, bring the coders in the room. I think that would be really, really awesome.
I love that. And, you know, I live in, as you know, San Francisco / Silicon Valley, and we do a lot of vibe coding and the things that used to take a week or a month are now taking like a weekend or a day. And so actually there could be, maybe that's the second collaboration we could do, is a corporate toolkit for vibe coding these pilots. We should work on that also. I feel like that could be where it gets really concrete and people collaborate. We had a group from Central Asia on campus last week, and it was so interesting to get people to roll their sleeves up and actually do things, not just listen to lectures. So that's a great idea to think of these kind of almost like a venture studio mindset with the corporates, so that we can zoom out, look at some of the big issues, look proactively and optimistically at some of the opportunities, because with all the data that we've got now, that certainly we can find creative ways to tackle it. And I also think what you were saying about everyone in their swim lane, and also being comfortable enough to sort of put toes in each other's swim lanes, to understand the incredible collaboration opportunities where the innovation is happening in the entrepreneurial world, where the scaling and the deep interoperability is happening in the corporate. To me, there's a moment that's coming where we can bring all of this together and just get people in a room and solve things, pilot things, and really accelerate progress. So my last question is, what should I have asked you? Or no, let me not ask that. I think my last question should be, what's one aha that you had just from our time together?
One aha. I think it's really the mindset shift. I think it's the mindset shift. And I think the idea that that's where everything begins. The moment we can get the board of these corporates to realize how powerful they are, right? This article I wrote a week ago about liquidity, I said Africa has raised $30 billion approximately since VC started in 2014. For investors to make their money back, there needs to be liquidity events worth $90 billion. Think about that. Exits worth $90 billion. There is no way for that money to come back out unless corporates are part of the game, unless they're buying companies, unless they're investing in companies. In Japan, that is what's happening. The CVCs, the Toyota, the Mitsui, the Mitsubishi, those are the guys, the Yamahas, those are the guys that power the whole innovation ecosystem, but they don't do it inside the big corporates. They do it outside the corporates through CVCs and funds and those type of things. So that's really where we hope to be able to help corporates to catalyze their investment ecosystem, setting up of funds, innovation programs, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that the MIT ecosystem approach is also one that I think that mindset shift is just, the time is now.
I love that. The mindset shift, time is now. That is the perfect ending. Thank you, Bhumi. This is a great conversation. It could have, honestly, we're just getting started, and hopefully we'll be working together on collaborative programs, both on campus as well as in the field, for corporate growth and and scaling in these growth markets. So thank you so much. And I've already got a couple of ideas for collaboration just from our conversation today. Thank you so much, and see you soon in person, I think.
This was so good. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Okay, and now I'd like to introduce our next webinar, which will be November 12th with Amir Awadallah, who is CEO of Vectara. And he'll be talking about his perspective on growth markets. We'd love for you to be part of it, so mark your calendars and hope you'll join us. And also, we want to hear from you. So let us know what topics you'd like us to cover. Who would you like to hear from on this webinar series? And take a moment, we have a short survey. Would love to hear your feedback. And you'll help us make this really a relevant and lively conversation. Thanks again for being with us today, and look forward to seeing you at the next webinar.